The sound echoed through Judge Judy's courtroom like a thunderclap. A woman had just hit the floor with such force that the bailiff's first instinct was to check if something structural had failed in the building. Karen Denise Patterson lay sprawled across the courtroom tile. Her designer purse spilled open, its contents scattered like shrapnel. Her face was frozen in shock and disbelief as paramedics rushed to her side. But this wasn't a medical emergency. This was the precise moment when crushing reality shattered years of entitlement and arrogance. What had Judge Judy revealed that could cause such a spectacular collapse? The answer would soon become the most viral courtroom moment in television history, shared over 50 million times across every social media platform imaginable. Just 20 minutes earlier, Karen had walked into that courtroom with absolute confidence, flanked by what she believed was her secret weapon. A sharply dressed attorney she thought would finally put that uppity personal trainer in his place. She had paid good money for the best legal representation. Or so she believed. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy had already spent her morning on the phone, calling the California State Bar, police departments, and fraud investigation units. She had no idea that the man sitting beside her in that expensive suit was about to be exposed as one of the most brazen con artists ever to enter a courtroom. And she certainly didn't realize that her own arrogance would be the final ingredient in her complete and total undoing. Before we get to what Judge Judy uncovered about Karen's so-called lawyer, and before we reveal the devastating evidence that brought this entitled woman literally to her knees, understand this. What you're about to see isn't just another courtroom case. It's a masterclass in how karma works when you think you're too clever to get caught. C'est true. This is what happens when you try to buy your way out of consequences and discover that justice cannot be fooled by expensive suits or fake credentials. Karen Denise Patterson had spent 48 years perfecting the art of getting her way through sheer force of personality and the strategic use of her considerable physical presence. At nearly 400 pounds, she had long ago learned that taking up space, both literally and figuratively, could intimidate people into submission. She was the kind of woman who would park her massive SUV across 2 spaces at the grocery store and dare anyone to say something. The kind of customer whose photo hung behind the counter at local businesses, warning employees about her endless complaints. Her former employees at the retail stores she managed described her as a nightmare boss, one who ruled through volume, fear, and humiliation. But in Karen's mind, she was never the problem. She believed she simply had high standards, that most people were lazy, incompetent, or too sensitive to meet them. When she hired Miguel Santos as her personal trainer 6 months earlier, she saw it as just another opportunity to fix someone she thought wasn't doing their job properly. Miguel came highly recommended. He had an impressive client list and a thriving training studio in a good part of town. But from their very first session, Karen treated him like a servant. She would show up late, sometimes by half an hour or more, and still demand the full hour of training. She spent most sessions on her phone, barking orders between calls. When Miguel tried to correct her form or suggest modifications, she snapped that she knew her own body and didn't need some gym rat telling her what to do. Then the behavior turned darker. Karen made comments about Miguel's accent, asking where he was really from and implying things about his immigration status, despite the fact that he was born in Los Angeles. She touched him inappropriately during sessions, brushing his arms and chest in ways that made him visibly uncomfortable. After 6 sessions, she simply stopped paying, claiming his training wasn't worth the money and threatening to leave bad reviews if he pursued payment. Miguel tried to handle it professionally. He sent polite reminders, then firmer invoices. He offered payment plans, even proposing to part ways peacefully if she'd just pay for the sessions already completed. Karen responded by escalating. She found his home address and showed up unannounced, pounding on his door and shouting that he was trying to scam her. She called his clients, spreading lies about his business. And when Miguel posted a vague statement on social media about setting boundaries with difficult clients, Karen, convinced it was about her, became enraged. That's when she decided Miguel needed to be taught a lesson. And that's when she met Derek Williamson, the man who would become her biggest mistake. Or at least that was the name on his business card and website. His office was in a decent building, his website looked professional, and he had assured Karen he handled defamation cases all the time. More importantly, he told Karen exactly what she wanted to hear. That she had a strong case, that Miguel was clearly in the wrong, and that they would make him pay for disrespecting someone of her stature. Karen paid him a $3,000 retainer up front, followed by monthly payments for consultations and case preparation. Over 6 months, she gave Derek Williamson $12,000, and in return, he filled her head with legal jargon and confident predictions of victory. He prepped her for this moment, insisting Judge Judy would see things their way, and promising his courtroom presence would intimidate Miguel into settling. As Karen stepped into Judge Judy's courtroom that morning with Derek beside her, she felt invincible. Derek looked the part. A fitted charcoal suit that probably cost $800, a leather briefcase gleaming under the lights, and wire-rimmed glasses that lent an intellectual air. His legal pad was covered in notes. His demeanor suggested he'd done this 100 times before. Karen kept glancing at Miguel, who sat quietly without a lawyer, clutching a folder of documents and looking nervous. She smirked. This was going to be easy. Miguel would learn what happens when you mess with someone who has resources and connections. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy's assistant had flagged something unusual during the routine background checks. Derek Williamson's bar registration returned no results. When the search widened, the name that came up was Derek Johnson, a paralegal who had been terminated from his law firm 3 years earlier. Judge Judy had made calls that morning, and what she discovered turned a small claims spat into something far more serious. She had evidence in a folder on her bench that would expose not one fraud, but 2 people who thought they could manipulate the system. As Karen settled into her seat, still radiating smug confidence, Judge Judy watched with the patient interest of someone who had already set the perfect trap. She opened the proceedings with characteristic directness. "Ms. Patterson, you're suing Mr. Santos for $5,000, claiming defamation and emotional distress. Tell me what happened." It was a simple question the judge had asked thousands of times. Instead of a straightforward account, Karen launched into a theatrical performance that would have made soap opera actors cringe. "Your Honor, this man completely destroyed my reputation through his reckless social media posts," she began, voice heavy with manufactured outrage. "I hired him as my personal trainer, paid him good money, and treated him with respect and professionalism. How does he repay me? By posting lies about me for the world to see. As my attorney can confirm, this is defamation under California law." She gestured dramatically toward Derek, who nodded while shuffling papers, trying to embody professional authority. But Karen couldn't stick to facts. She editorialized, rolling her eyes when describing Miguel's methods, and using air quotes around professional. This man claimed to be a fitness expert. "Your Honor, but he clearly had no idea how to work with clients of a certain size and stature. He was rude, dismissive, and more interested in himself than in helping me." The audience shifted uneasily. Something in Karen's testimony felt off. Too rehearsed, more attack than explanation. Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted. A warning sign seasoned viewers recognized. "Ms. Patterson," she interrupted, her tone still civil but sharp, "I didn't ask for your evaluation of his training methods. I asked what happened that led you to believe you were defamed. Stick to the facts, please." The correction was clear. Any reasonable person would have adjusted. Blinded by years of facing no consequences, Karen missed the cue entirely. She let out an exaggerated sigh, the same dismissive sound she used with service workers. "Well, if you'll let me finish my story, Your Honor," she replied. "I was trying to explain the context of why his post was so damaging. You see, when someone like him, someone of low character and questionable motives, posts about me, Her sentence trailed as a ripple of murmurs moved through the courtroom. Judge Judy's gaze hardened. The stage was set for the moment when the veneer of authority around Derek and the facade Karen had built with him would be stripped away. Who doesn't exactly have a spotless reputation himself, posts about difficult clients. People automatically assume he's talking about me. The courtroom went silent. Even the camera operator froze. Karen had just sighed at Judge Judy, implying the judge was interrupting her unfairly, and suggested she should be allowed to tell her story her way. Judge Judy leaned forward, her famous steely gaze locking onto Karen like a heat-seeking missile finding its target. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that made even seasoned attorneys break into cold sweats. "Did you just sigh at me in my courtroom?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Incredibly, Karen thought everything was still going according to plan. She had brought her lawyer for moments exactly like this, to back her up when judges pushed her around. She glanced at Derek, who gave a small nod. She took that as encouragement to stand her ground. "I'm just trying to explain my case, Your Honor," Karen said defensively. "My attorney and I have prepared extensive documentation showing how Mr. Santos's actions caused me severe emotional distress and reputational harm. If we could just move forward with presenting our evidence, you'll see this is a clear-cut case of defamation." She spoke with the confidence of someone who had spent 6 months being told by her fake lawyer that her case was airtight, that judges would take her side, that her money and preparation made her untouchable. Judge Judy made a note on her pad, her expression unreadable, and turned her attention to Miguel Santos. "Mr. Santos, tell me your version of events." Miguel sat up straighter, nervous but determined. "Your Honor, I trained Ms. Patterson for 6 weeks, a total of 6 sessions. From the first session, she was disrespectful and inappropriate. She showed up extremely late, sometimes 40 minutes late, but still expected a full hour. She refused to follow basic safety instructions and made comments about my background and appearance that made me uncomfortable." His voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of someone who had endured harassment and was finally speaking his truth. "But the real problem, Your Honor," he continued, "was that after 6 sessions she refused to pay. I sent invoices, offered payment plans, and tried to resolve it professionally. Instead, she escalated. She found my home address and showed up at my house screaming in front of my neighbors. She even called my other clients, trying to turn them against me. When I made a general post about setting boundaries with difficult clients, she assumed it was about her and decided to sue." Miguel pulled out his phone. "These are messages she sent me, Your Honor. Threats, insults, accusations. I never mentioned her name publicly. I just wanted to be paid for my work and left alone." Karen laughed, a sharp, dismissive bark that echoed through the courtroom. "Oh, please," she said loudly. "You should be grateful I even hired you. Do you know how many trainers would kill for clients who can actually afford premium rates? The fact that you couldn't handle one strong-willed client says everything about your lack of professionalism." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed, watching Karen dig herself in deeper. "And as for showing up at your house," Karen added, "I was trying to resolve our dispute like an adult, instead of hiding behind lawyers like you're doing now." The irony of that statement, coming from a woman who had brought a lawyer to small claims court to intimidate her opponent, was completely lost on her. Karen sat back with her arms crossed, radiating smug satisfaction. This was going exactly as Derek had promised. She was standing up for herself, showing this judge she couldn't be pushed around, and making Miguel look weak and unprofessional. What she failed to notice was how Judge Judy's gaze had shifted, now fixed on Derek. Her sharp eyes examined him like a surgeon pinpointing the exact spot for an incision. The trap was set. Judge Judy was about to spring it with devastating precision. She turned her attention fully to Derek Williamson, or the man claiming to be him, and the temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. Her posture shifted, calm but coiled. The air thickened with tension. "Mr. Williamson," she began, her tone deceptively gentle, "I'd like to ask you a few questions about your representation of Ms. Patterson." Derek shifted, straightening his tie with trembling fingers. "Of course, Your Honor. I'm happy to answer any questions." His voice carried practiced confidence, but there was a crack of uncertainty now. Something in her tone told him this wasn't routine. Karen still radiated confidence beside him, convinced her expensive attorney was about to impress the judge. "Let's start simple," Judge Judy said, pen poised over her pad. "Where did you receive your law degree, Mr. Williamson?" Derek's answer came smoothly, rehearsed from months of lying. "Southwestern Law School, Your Honor. Class of 2012. "Southwestern Law School," Judge Judy repeated, jotting something down. "And you're licensed to practice law in which states?" "California and New York, Your Honor," Derek said quickly. "I maintain active status in both." Karen smiled, satisfied. This was exactly what she wanted, a show of authority and credibility. "What year were you admitted to the California State Bar, Mr. Williamson?" Judge Judy asked, eyes never leaving his face. Derek swallowed. 2015, Your Honor, 3 years after graduation. I worked as a clerk before taking the bar exam." The lie came easily, but his body betrayed him. His shoulders tightened, his breathing quickened, and his eyes darted toward the folder on Judge Judy's desk. Something was very, very wrong. "Firm 3 years ago for unauthorized practice of law, specifically for giving legal advice to clients without supervision from a licensed attorney. Following his termination, he created a fake law office website under the name Derek Williamson and Associates, rented a shared workspace for appearances, and began posing as a legitimate attorney to unsuspecting clients like Ms. Patterson." The courtroom gasped. Karen's mouth fell open, her head shaking in disbelief. No, that's not possible," she stammered. You represented me. You sent me contracts, legal filings." Judge Judy's eyes snapped toward her, her tone slicing through the air. "He sent you nothing that was legally valid, Ms. Patterson. Every one of those documents you signed was a fabrication. He is not, nor has he ever been, a member of the California Bar. I confirmed that myself this morning." She held up another sheet of paper. "This is a letter from the California State Bar Association confirming that no one named Derek Williamson or Derek Johnson is, or has ever been, admitted to practice law in this state. And this," she tapped the document for emphasis, "is a record from the Los Angeles Police Department's Fraud Division. They have an open investigation into Mr. Johnson for impersonating an attorney and defrauding multiple clients of more than $50,000. The room exploded in murmurs. The bailiff immediately stepped forward, positioning himself between Derek and the exit. Karen looked like her entire world had collapsed. Her face had gone pale, her breathing ragged. "No," she whispered again, her voice trembling. You told me—" Judge Judy's tone turned razor sharp. "He lied to you, Ms. Patterson, because you wanted to hear that you were right. You paid him thousands of dollars to tell you that your arrogance and cruelty were justified. And instead of hiring a real lawyer, you hired a con man. That is the price of your entitlement." Derek finally spoke, his voice hoarse and barely audible. Your Honor, I never meant to— Don't. Judge Judy cut him off instantly, her voice like thunder. Don't insult this court with another lie. You've been practicing law without a license for years, defrauding people who trusted you. You took this woman's money and used it to fuel your little fantasy of being a lawyer. Well, fantasy time is over. Karen turned toward him, her face twisted with rage. You scammed me, she screamed. You took my money. You ruined my life. Judge Judy slammed her hand on the bench. Enough! You're both responsible for this circus. You, Ms. Patterson, for thinking you could buy justice instead of earning it. And you, Mr. Johnson, for impersonating an officer of the court. She turned to the bailiff. Get him out of my courtroom. I'm forwarding all of this to the authorities. As the bailiff stepped forward to handcuff Derek, the man who had once styled himself as Attorney Derek Williamson didn't resist. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he was led toward the door. The cameras followed his exit, the image of his broken composure forever captured for millions to see. Judge Judy then looked back at Karen, her voice cool and final. Miss Patterson, your case is dismissed with prejudice. You will receive no compensation. In fact, you may find yourself answering questions from the same investigators who will be looking into Mr. Johnson's activities, especially if you were complicit in presenting false information to this court. Karen's lip quivered. I didn't know, she whispered. Judge Judy leaned forward, her voice low but firm. You didn't want to know, and that's the difference. The gavel came down with a deafening crack. The case of Patterson v. Santos would go on to become one of the most viral courtroom moments in television history. Viewed over 50 million times online, dissected on talk shows, and taught in media ethics classes as the ultimate example of arrogance meeting accountability. And somewhere between the echo of Judge Judy's gavel and the sound of the bailiff's handcuffs, Karen Denise Patterson finally understood what it felt like to be on the receiving end of real justice. She leaned back in her chair, that dangerous smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the expression her regular viewers had learned to recognize as the prelude to someone's complete annihilation. Mr. Williamson, have you reviewed all the discovery materials in this case? Have you examined the evidence that Mr. Santos has provided, including the text messages, the payment records, and the timeline of events? Derek fumbled with his briefcase, pulling out papers with hands that were now visibly shaking. Yes, Your Honor, I've reviewed everything thoroughly. We're prepared to demonstrate that Ms. Patterson has been the victim of a calculated campaign of defamation. Then perhaps you can explain to me, Judge Judy said, her voice taking on an edge that could cut through steel, why you didn't file a motion to dismiss based on the statute of limitations for defamation claims in California. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and Derek's face went from confident to confused in the span of a heartbeat. He stared at Judge Judy, then down at his papers, shuffling through them frantically as if the answer might be hidden somewhere in his notes. I felt that wasn't the strongest legal approach in this particular case, Your Honor. We wanted to focus on the merits rather than procedural technicalities. Really? Judge Judy's eyebrows raised in theatrical disbelief. Because any first-year law student would know that in California, you have 1 year to file a defamation claim from the date of publication. Mr. Santos made his social media post 8 months ago. You would have been well within the statute of limitations, and it would have been standard practice to at least consider that motion as part of your strategy. So, why didn't you? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No words came out, just the desperate attempt to formulate an answer that would satisfy this increasingly hostile line of questioning. Karen, sitting beside her supposed legal champion, felt the first stirrings of genuine unease. She nudged Derek with her elbow, her voice a harsh whisper that the courtroom microphones picked up clearly. What is she talking about? You said we had a strong case. Derek, still shuffling papers, whispered back without looking at her, "It's fine. She's just trying to intimidate us. Stay calm." But the sweat beading on his forehead and the tremor in his hands told a very different story than his reassuring words. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "Let me ask you something else, Mr. Williamson. In your review of the evidence, did you advise your client about the potential risks of bringing this lawsuit? Did you explain to her that malicious prosecution or abuse of process could result in sanctions? Did you discuss the possibility that Mr. Santos might file a countersuit for harassment?" These were basic questions, the kind of risk assessment that any competent attorney would discuss with a client before filing a lawsuit. Derek's answer became more vague, more desperate. "We discussed various scenarios, Your Honor. I believe we've taken a measured approach to this litigation." "A measured approach?" Judge Judy repeated, her voice dripping with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Williamson, can you explain to this court the difference between defamation per se and defamation per quod under California law?" The question was a direct challenge, a test that any licensed attorney could answer in their sleep. Derek's face had gone from nervous to pale, from pale to ashen. He opened his mouth several times, each time failing to produce a coherent answer. "Well, Your Honor, defamation per se is, it's when the statement is, inherently defamatory. And defamation per quod is, when you need to prove additional facts and, His voice trailed off into incomprehensible mumbling. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, turning her laser focus to Karen, who was now staring at Derek with growing horror. "Does your attorney know what he's doing?" The question was simple, but it carried implications that were starting to penetrate even Karen's thick wall of confidence. "Of course he does," Karen snapped back, her voice rising defensively. "He's the best lawyer money can buy. He's been handling my case for 6 months. You're just trying to intimidate us because you know we have a strong case against that man." She pointed at Miguel, trying to redirect attention back to her original target. 6 months, Judge Judy said softly, almost to herself, as she opened the thick folder on her desk. She pulled out several documents, each one a piece of evidence in the trap she had been carefully constructing since the moment Derek had identified himself as an attorney. "Ms. Patterson, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about your representation in this case. And Mr. Williamson, or whoever you really are, I think it's time we discussed exactly who you are and what you've been doing for the last 6 months." The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the audience members, who usually whispered among themselves, had fallen into stunned quiet. Karen's confident smile had finally begun to crack, replaced by the first genuine fear she had felt since walking into that courtroom. Derek looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting between Judge Judy, the bailiff, and the exit doors. And Judge Judy, America's most feared television judge, was about to deliver a revelation that would destroy both of them in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. The trap had been sprung, and there was no escape. Judge Judy lifted the first document from her folder with the deliberate precision of a prosecutor presenting the murder weapon in a capital case. Her eyes locked onto the man sitting next to Karen, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority mixed with barely restrained fury. "Mr. Derek Williamson," she began, pausing for dramatic effect. "Or should I say, Mr. Derek Johnson?" The name hung in the air like a death sentence, and the color drained from Derek's face so quickly that he looked like he might pass out on the spot. "What?" Karen's voice came out as a strangled whisper, her head whipping toward the man she had trusted with $12,000 and her entire legal strategy. "What is she talking about, Derek? What does she mean, Derek Johnson?" But Derek couldn't answer. He sat frozen in his chair, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time as millions of viewers watched his destruction unfold on national television. Judge Judy continued, her voice growing stronger and more damning with each word. Derek Johnson is not a licensed attorney in California, New York, or any other state in this country. He does not have a law degree from Southwestern Law School or any other accredited institution. In fact, Mr. Johnson applied to Southwestern Law School twice and was rejected both times due to failing entrance exam scores. She held up the documents, showing them to the camera and the courtroom. I have here the admission records from Southwestern Law School confirming that no Derek Williamson graduated in 2012 and that Derek Johnson was denied admission in 2009 and again in 2011. Karen's breathing became rapid and shallow, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair as the implications began to sink in. "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "No, this is ridiculous, Derek. Tell her she's wrong. Show her your credentials. You showed me your bar certificate. You have an office. You have a website. Tell her!" But Derek remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze as his entire criminal enterprise collapsed around him. Judge Judy wasn't finished with her systematic destruction of Derek's fraudulent identity. "Mr. Johnson did work in the legal field," she continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "He was employed as a paralegal at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized firm in downtown Los Angeles. He was terminated from that position 3 years ago for forging attorney signatures on legal documents and misrepresenting himself to clients as a licensed lawyer." She held up another document. "I have his termination letter right here, along with a police report filed by the firm when they discovered his fraudulent activities." The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. The bailiff took a step closer to Derek, his hand moving instinctively toward his duty belt. Karen looked like she had been physically struck, her face cycling through emotions so rapidly it was impossible to pin down any single feeling. Shock, betrayal, rage, and fear all competing for dominance. "This can't be real," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "This can't be happening." But Judge Judy had even more devastating evidence to present. After being fired from Henderson and Associates, Mr. Johnson set up a fake law practice. He rented an office in a shared workspace building, created a professional-looking website using stock photos and fabricated credentials, and began soliciting clients who needed legal representation. She pulled out printed screenshots of the website, showing a professional headshot that was clearly a stock photo, testimonials from clients who didn't exist, and credentials from law schools that had never heard of him. Over the past 2 years, Mr. Johnson has defrauded at least 9 clients that we know of, taking their money for legal services he was not qualified or licensed to provide. Karen made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. 9, she repeated. 9 other people. Her mind was racing, trying to calculate how many others had been sitting where she was sitting now, trusting this man with their legal problems and their money. How many other people had paid him thousands of dollars, believing he was going to fight for them in court, only to discover they had been victims of an elaborate con. Judge Judy held up a sheaf of bank statements and payment records. "Ms. Patterson, according to these financial records that we subpoenaed this morning, you have paid Derek Johnson $12,000 over the past 6 months, $3,000 as an initial retainer, followed by monthly payments of $1,500 for consultations, case preparation, and legal representation. None of that money went into a client trust account, as would be required for a legitimate attorney. All of it went directly into Mr. Johnson's personal checking account, where he used it to pay his rent, buy expensive clothes, and maintain the appearance of a successful lawyer." $12,000. The number echoed in Karen's head like a bell tolling her doom. She had paid $12,000 to a fake lawyer. She had bragged to her friends about having the best legal representation money could buy. She had walked into this courtroom with absolute confidence, certain her attorney would destroy Miguel Santos and teach him a lesson about respecting his betters. And all of it, every single bit of it, had been a lie. She had been conned, scammed, defrauded by a paralegal who had been fired for the exact same behavior he had perpetrated against her. Judge Judy turned her attention fully to Derek, who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Mr. Johnson, you are currently under investigation by the California State Bar for the unauthorized practice of law. You have active warrants in 2 counties for fraud and grand theft, and as of this moment, you are in contempt of this court for misrepresenting yourself as a licensed attorney." She gestured to the bailiff. "Officer, please detain Mr. Johnson. He will be turned over to the proper authorities for prosecution." The bailiff moved quickly, pulling Derek to his feet and securing his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. Derek finally found his voice, and it came out as a pathetic whimper. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just needed money, and these people were so easy to convince. I thought I could help them. I thought if I just acted like a lawyer, I could figure it out." His confession tumbled out in a desperate stream, each word another nail in his coffin. Karen stared at him with undisguised hatred as the bailiff led him toward the door. As Derek was escorted from the courtroom, Judge Judy turned her full attention back to Karen, who sat in stunned silence, her entire world crumbling around her. "Ms. Patterson, your case against Mr. Santos is dismissed immediately. You came into my courtroom with fraudulent representation, which invalidates these proceedings entirely. More importantly, you will be lucky if you don't face criminal charges yourself as an accessory to Mr. Johnson's fraud. The district attorney's office will be reviewing your involvement to determine if you knew or should have known that your so-called attorney was not licensed to practice law." Karen tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her like an avalanche. She had lost $12,000. Her lawsuit was dismissed. She might face criminal charges. And worst of all, she had been exposed on national television as someone so arrogant and foolish that she had been She had been conned by a fake lawyer for 6 months without ever bothering to verify his credentials. Every friend she had bragged to, every neighbor she had told about her lawsuit, every person who would see this episode would know that Karen Patterson had been played for a fool. Judge Judy's final words before turning to Miguel were delivered with the cold finality of a judge, pronouncing sentence. "Mr. Santos, you are free to file a countersuit against Ms. Patterson for harassment, emotional distress, and any other damages you have suffered from her campaign against you. I suggest you find yourself a real attorney, one who is actually licensed to practice law. This court stands adjourned." The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like thunder, and Karen Denise Patterson's world went completely black as the full weight of her humiliation became too much for her consciousness to bear. The collapse happened so fast that the bailiff barely had time to react. Karen's breathing had become increasingly rapid and shallow as Judge Judy delivered her final ruling. Her face cycled through colors like a malfunctioning traffic light, from red to white to a sickly gray. She tried to stand, her legs shaking violently beneath her considerable weight, and then her eyes rolled back, and she went down. The sound of 380 pounds hitting the courtroom floor reverberated through the building like a small earthquake. Her designer purse flew across the floor, spilling its contents in a humiliating scatter of lipsticks, breath mints, and the receipts for $12,000 in payments to a fake lawyer. Court staff rushed to her side as the cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of her spectacular downfall. Paramedics were called, but it quickly became clear this wasn't a heart attack or a stroke. It was a panic attack of epic proportions. The complete psychological breakdown of a woman who had just discovered that her arrogance had cost her everything. As Karen was loaded onto a stretcher, still conscious but sobbing uncontrollably, Miguel Santos sat quietly in his chair, vindicated after months of harassment and abuse. The video went viral within hours, exploding across every social media platform with the hashtag #FakeLawyer, trending worldwide for 4 straight days. News outlets picked up the story. Legal experts weighed in on the dangers of unlicensed legal practice, and Derek Johnson's other victims began coming forward. 8 more people had been scammed by his fake law practice, bringing his total fraud to over $87,000. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution, though most victims never recovered their money. Karen's life unraveled completely in the aftermath. She lost her job when the viral video made her unemployable. Her friends abandoned her after seeing her racist and abusive behavior on display, and Miguel filed a successful countersuit that awarded him $8,500 in damages. She was forced to sell her SUV and move to a smaller apartment. Her dreams of superiority replaced by the reality of being internet famous for all the wrong reasons. The $12,000 she had paid Derek was never recovered. Miguel Santos, on the other hand, saw his business explode with supportive clients who admired his dignity and professionalism throughout the ordeal. He used his settlement money to open a second training location and became an advocate for service workers dealing with abusive clients. Judge Judy's handling of the case became legendary in legal circles, a masterclass in investigative justice that exposed not just one fraud, but 2 people who thought they could manipulate the system. The lesson was crystal clear. Arrogance, entitlement, and fraud always catch up with you eventually. And when they do, the fall is spectacular, public, and absolutely deserved. The television courtroom was about to witness something that would break the internet and shatter a mother's world forever. Diane Patterson sat in the witness chair with the kind of composed confidence that comes only from years of practiced deception. Her perfectly styled blonde hair, designer blazer, and rehearsed smile projected an image of suburban respectability. But beneath that carefully constructed facade was a woman who had spent 25 years building a house of lies to protect her son. And Judge Judy. Scheindlin was about to burn that house to the ground with the cold, hard flames of truth. What unfolded over the next 8 minutes would become one of the most viral courtroom moments in television history. Shared more than 30 million times across social media, dissected by legal experts, and cited by family therapists as the ultimate cautionary tale about the difference between love and enabling, this case became legend. Diane had walked into that courtroom believing she had everything under control. She'd rehearsed her testimony for weeks, memorized every line of the alibi she'd created for her 28-year-old son, Brandon. She'd perfected her tone, the voice of a protective mother who simply couldn't believe her child could do any wrong. After all, she'd done it before. 3 previous lawsuits, 3 previous testimonies. 3 times she'd lied under oath to save Brandon from consequences. Each time she'd walked away feeling like a hero, a devoted mother willing to do anything for her child. She had no idea that this time would be catastrophically different. She didn't know Judge Judy had already spent days reviewing court records, surveillance footage, phone logs, and bank statements. She didn't know every lie she was about to tell had already been disproven. Most devastating of all, she didn't know her son's own text messages would expose not only his guilt, but her active participation in years of deception that had allowed him to exploit innocent victims. The case itself seemed simple. Brandon Patterson was accused of stealing $12,000 from his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Helen Chen, a 73-year-old widow who'd made the fatal mistake of trusting the nice young man next door. Mrs. Chen sat in the plaintiff's chair, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder of bank statements and forged signatures. She looked fragile and exhausted, the kind of weary that comes from betrayal by someone you considered family. After her husband's death 18 months earlier, she'd struggled to manage finances alone. Overwhelmed, she'd welcomed Brandon's offer to help organize her bills and protect her from predatory companies. He'd visited her twice a week, shared coffee and stories, called her Grandma Helen, even brought flowers on holidays. She trusted him completely, enough to grant him power of attorney over one account. Within 3 months, $12,000 had vanished, and Brandon stopped answering her calls. But this wasn't just about money. It was about a long, dark pattern. Brandon had been shielded by his mother since his teenage years. At 16, he stole from his high school fundraiser. Diane blamed the accounting system. At 19, he scammed his college roommate for $3,000. Diane paid it back quietly. At 23, he defrauded a small business. Diane negotiated a settlement and forced an NDA. At 25, he stole from an employer. Diane hired a top lawyer to reduce charges. Each time, she swooped in to rescue him, teaching him that there would always be a way out, that Mom would always save him. She told herself she was being a good mother. In truth, she was creating a monster. Now 28, Brandon sat beside his attorney, looking like an innocent victim of misunderstanding. His neat clothes, modest haircut, and expression of hurt confusion would have fooled most people, but not Judge Judy. In her 35 years on the bench, she'd developed an almost supernatural sense for spotting liars, manipulators, and sociopaths. From the moment Brandon and his mother entered her courtroom, every alarm bell in her head went off. The shared glances, the synchronized story, the body language, it all screamed conspiracy. This wasn't just another fraud case. It was a story of how parental love, twisted by fear and control, could mutate into enabling and destruction. Judge Judy opened the proceedings with her trademark efficiency. Her sharp eyes moved between the defendant, his mother, and the trembling elderly victim. The courtroom buzzed with the electric tension of something about to explode. Diane took the stand with the poise of a woman who'd done this before. Her hands were steady as she swore an oath she was about to violate. She sat gracefully, crossed her ankles, and prepared to perform the testimony she'd rehearsed for weeks, unaware that every word was about to be torn apart by evidence. Mrs. Patterson, Judge Judy began calmly, you stated in your written testimony that your son Brandon was with you on the afternoon of March 15th, the day Mrs. Chen's account was accessed and $12,000 withdrawn. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Diane replied warmly, confident. Brandon was with me all day. We were doing yard work, preparing the garden for spring. He never left my sight from 9 a.m. until almost 6 p.m. There's simply no way he could have been anywhere near Mrs. Chen's bank or her home. I'm his mother, and a mother knows where her child is. The certainty in her voice was chilling, honed by years of lies told so often they'd become second nature. She even offered Mrs. Chen a sympathetic look, as if to suggest the poor woman was simply confused. Judge Judy flipped through her notes, expression neutral. Her questions came one after another, gentle at first, but tightening like a noose. What exactly were you planting that day, Mrs. Patterson? Oh, tulip bulbs and vegetable beds, Diane answered smoothly. What time did you break for lunch? Around noon. We had sandwiches on the patio. Did anyone else see you and Brandon that day? No, it was just the two of us. A nice mother-son day together? Her answers came too easily, too perfect, too rehearsed. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed slightly. A subtle shift that seasoned viewers knew meant she'd spotted the crack. "You said you worked in the garden all morning," Judy noted. "That's correct," Diane replied. "But according to weather records, March 15th was one of the rainiest days that month. It rained from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. How exactly were you doing yard work in a downpour?" The question hit like a bomb. Diane froze, then tried to recover. "Well, Your Honor, perhaps I'm mistaken about the exact date. It might have been the 14th or 16th. You know how days blur together." Judge Judy's tone turned surgical. "Mrs. Patterson, just moments ago you said you were absolutely certain of the date, that you remembered it clearly because it was a special mother-son day. Now suddenly it's unclear? Which is it?" Diane's composure began to crack. Her tone shifted from confidence to defensiveness. "I'm certain he was with me one of those days, Your Honor. The exact date might be slightly off, but I know my son. He didn't steal from Mrs. Chen. He's not that kind of person. I raised him better than that." The statement hung in the air like a warning, and Judge Judy pounced. "You raised him better than that. Let's talk about how you raised him, Mrs. Patterson," Judge Judy said, opening another folder. This one considerably thicker. "Are you aware that your son has been sued 4 times in the past decade for fraud and theft?" Diane's face hardened. "Those cases were all misunderstandings, Your Honor. Brandon was young and made some mistakes in judgment, but he's grown and learned from those experiences." "Misunderstandings?" Judge Judy's voice could have cut glass. "You paid $47,000 in settlements to his victims. That's quite a lot of money for misunderstandings. And in at least 2 of those cases, you provided alibis for your son that were later proven false. Would you call those misunderstandings as well?" The courtroom had gone completely silent except for the sound of Mrs. Chen quietly crying in her chair. Diane shot her a look of pure irritation, as if the elderly woman's tears were an inconvenient performance rather than genuine pain. "Your Honor, I did what any mother would do. I protected my child. I gave him chances to prove himself, to show that he could be better. That's what parents are supposed to do. We don't abandon our children when they make mistakes." Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, a posture every longtime viewer knew meant devastation was coming. "Mrs. Patterson," she said coolly, "protecting your child and enabling criminal behavior are not the same thing. But we'll return to that discussion in a moment. For now, let's revisit your testimony about March 15th. You're absolutely certain Brandon was with you that entire afternoon?" Diane sensed this might be her final chance to keep her story intact, and doubled down with renewed conviction. "Yes, Your Honor, I am 100% certain. I would stake my reputation on it. A mother knows the truth." Judge Judy smiled, not kindly, but like someone who had just heard exactly what she needed. Those words, that absolute certainty, would become the foundation of Diane's downfall. She reached for the manila folder that had sat on her bench all morning, the one Diane had assumed was just court paperwork. The moment Judge Judy's hand touched it, the energy in the courtroom shifted. Even Brandon, who had been relaxed while his mother spun her web of lies, suddenly tensed in his chair. His attorney placed a warning hand on his arm, sensing that whatever came next would change everything. Mrs. Chen stopped crying and looked up, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. The audience collectively leaned forward, instinctively aware that something unforgettable was about to unfold. Judge Judy opened the folder slowly, deliberately, like a conductor building to a symphonic climax. "Mrs. Patterson," she began, her voice carrying the full weight of authority, "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to revise your testimony. One last chance to tell the truth before I present evidence that will not only prove you're lying, but could also result in criminal charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. Would you like to change your statement about your son's whereabouts on March 15th? The question was a gift, a rare courtesy, and the courtroom held its breath. But Diane Patterson, Blinded by 25 years of successful deception and convinced that a mother's word carried special power, made the fatal decision to stand by her lie. "No, Your Honor," she said steadily, ignoring the warning signs flashing all around her. "I have nothing to change. Everything I've said is the absolute truth. My son was with me, and I won't let an elderly woman's confusion ruin his life." That phrase, elderly woman's confusion, was the final straw that erased any remaining sympathy Judge Judy might have had. "Very well, Mrs. Patterson, let me show you what the absolute truth actually looks like." Judge Judy lifted the first piece of evidence and held it up for the cameras. This is security footage from Prestige Pawn Shop on Main Street, 3 blocks from Mrs. Chen's home. The timestamp shows March 15th at 2:47 p.m. Does this look familiar? She turned a monitor toward Diane and Brandon. The entire courtroom watched their faces drain of color. The footage showed Brandon Patterson, clearly visible, walking into the pawn shop carrying a small velvet bag. The timestamp was irrefutable, the image quality crystal clear. His distinctive tattoo, the same one Diane had paid for on his 21st birthday, was visible on his forearm. But Judge Judy wasn't finished. "This is what your son pawned that day, Mrs. Patterson." She held up an evidence bag containing jewelry, 3 pieces belonging to Mrs. Chen: her wedding band, her grandmother's brooch, and her daughter's wedding necklace. Your son stole these items from Mrs. Chen's home, where she'd trusted him with her house key, and pawned them for $850 cash. We have the pawn shop receipt with his signature and driver's license number. The air seemed to vanish from Diane's lungs. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The color drained from her face, leaving her gray under the harsh lights. Her hands, once steady, now trembled as they gripped the arms of the witness chair. Judge Judy continued with surgical precision. "That's not all, Mrs. Patterson. We also have cell tower records placing your son's phone at Mrs. Chen's home at 1:15 that afternoon, at the bank where her account was accessed at 2:03, and at the pawn shop at 2:47. We have security footage from the bank showing your son using Mrs. Chen's ATM card to withdraw $6,000 in cash. The bank manager testified that your son presented Mrs. Chen's power of attorney and identification, claiming he was withdrawing funds for medical expenses." She paused, then lifted another set of documents. But perhaps the most damning evidence of all is this. Judge Judy held up printed text message screenshots. "These are messages between your son and his friend Marcus Delgado, sent the morning of March 15th. Would you like me to read them aloud? Or have you realized yet how completely your credibility is destroyed?" Diane's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, Your Honor, I can explain." Judge Judy raised a hand to silence her. "You can explain how your son texted, and I quote, 'hitting the old lady's account today. Mom will cover for me like always if anything goes wrong. She's already practicing her testimony.' End quote. Can you explain that, Mrs. Patterson? Can you explain how you and your son planned this deception together? How you rehearsed false testimony while he was stealing from a vulnerable widow? Each word struck Diane like a physical blow, shredding her constructed reality. The courtroom erupted in gasps, forcing the bailiff to call for order. Mrs. Chen was openly weeping, but this time with relief. For months, she had been told she was confused, that grief had clouded her memory. Finally, someone believed her. But the most devastating moment was still to come. And it wouldn't come from Judge Judy. Brandon Patterson, the son Diane had just committed perjury to protect, suddenly stood up and shouted words that would haunt her forever. "This is ridiculous," he yelled, his voice dripping with entitlement. "You said this would work, Mom. You promised your testimony would be enough. This is your fault for not being more convincing." The betrayal in those words was absolute. In his moment of exposure, Brandon didn't apologize, didn't thank his mother, didn't show an ounce of remorse. He blamed her for failing to make their lie convincing enough. The transformation in Diane Patterson was immediate and devastating. The proud woman who'd entered the courtroom believing her devotion justified any deceit suddenly looked 20 years older in 20 seconds. Her son's words, "This is your fault for not being more convincing," hung in the air like poison. Everyone in that courtroom could see the exact moment she realized what she had done, who she had protected, and what she had become. Tears shimmered in her eyes, then poured freely, streaking through her makeup until she looked like a portrait melting in the rain. Brandon's attorney tried to calm him, but the son was too lost in his own arrogance and panic to stop. He kept shouting, louder and louder, "You said Judge Judy was just a TV judge, that she wouldn't have real evidence, that your testimony would be enough to reasonable doubt. You said we practiced this enough that nothing could go wrong." His words were daggers, each piercing deeper into his mother's heart, revealing the calculated nature of their conspiracy. The audience watched something extraordinary and terrible unfold. A public dissection of a corrupted mother-son relationship. Decades of enabling and manipulation laid bare for millions. Judge Judy remained silent, letting Brandon continue his self-destruction. Sometimes, the most powerful courtroom moments require no intervention. Only space for truth to reveal itself in all its ugly glory. Diane tried to speak, her voice breaking. "Brandon, please stop talking. Just stop." But her son, the child she had protected at the cost of her integrity, the one she had lied for, paid for, and covered for since he was a teenager, showed exactly how little her sacrifice meant. "No, Mom, I'm not stopping. You dragged me into this stupid TV court instead of just paying off the old lady like you did with everyone else. You said you'd handle it, that you'd protect me, and now look what's happened. We're both going to jail because you couldn't sell your story." The cruelty in his words was breathtaking. The complete absence of gratitude or remorse was staggering even for Judge Judy, who had seen every variety of human depravity. This wasn't just a criminal revealing his colors. This was a monster, nurtured by a mother's misguided protection. "Mr. Patterson," Judge Judy's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Sit down and be quiet before I add contempt of court to your growing list of charges." Then she turned her full attention to Diane, her expression a mix of stern judgment and measured pity. "Mrs. Patterson, look at your son right now. Really look at him. Look at the person you've been protecting all these years. The man who just blamed you for his crimes, who showed no gratitude for your sacrifices, who thinks the problem is that you weren't convincing enough rather than that he's a thief preying on vulnerable elderly women. Is this really who you want to destroy your life for?" The question landed with devastating impact. Diane turned to look at Brandon, seeing him clearly for the first time without the distorting lens of maternal devotion. What she saw destroyed her. A 28-year-old man still living in her home, never holding a legitimate job for more than a few months, spending her money, her husband's money, and now an elderly widow's money without remorse. Someone who had learned to weaponize her love, exploiting the certainty that she would always save him. A predator targeting the vulnerable, stealing from schools, roommates, employers, neighbors, and pawning a grieving widow's family heirlooms without a second thought. Most devastatingly, he looked at her not with love or gratitude, but with contempt for failing to commit perjury successfully on his behalf. The scales fell from her eyes. 25 years of denial crashed down on her. Diane's breakdown intensified. Her body shook with sobs. Her voice came in broken gasps. "I've ruined everything. My life, my marriage, my reputation, my integrity. And for what? For someone who doesn't even appreciate it, who blames me for not being a better liar. Oh God, what have I done? What have I created?" Her words, barely intelligible, carried raw agony. A woman realizing that her understanding of maternal love had been catastrophically wrong. Her husband had warned her she was enabling Brandon, not helping him, that her protection made him worse, not better. She had dismissed him. Now she saw he had been right. Every dollar paid, every lie told, every excuse made had been building a monster. Judge Judy allowed the moment to unfold fully, knowing Diane needed to feel the weight of her choices before any lesson could be learned. Then she spoke, her voice both stern and compassionate. "Mrs. Patterson, pull yourself together and listen carefully. You came here today prepared to commit perjury, obstruct justice, and help your son victimize an innocent woman. Your son has shown you exactly who he is, exactly what your protection created. The question now is, who are you going to choose to be? Will you continue enabling criminals, or finally be the parent he needed, someone who holds him accountable?" The courtroom fell into profound silence, broken only by Diane's ragged breathing. Her hands gripped the witness rail until her knuckles were white, her eyes red and swollen. She lifted her gaze to meet Judge Judy's. "Your Honor," she whispered, "I don't know how to be that person. I've spent 25 years believing protecting him was the same as loving him. I thought if I gave him enough chances, shielded him from consequences long enough, he would become the person I believed he could be. But you're right. I didn't create a better person. I created someone who steals from widows and blames his mother when caught. I've been so wrong, and Mrs. Chen has paid the price for my failure." Judge Judy nodded slowly. "Recognizing your mistakes is the first step. The question is whether you're willing to face consequences and make amends, not just feel sorry for yourself." Her gaze swept the courtroom. This court finds the defendant, Brandon Patterson, guilty of theft, fraud, and elder abuse. He is ordered to pay Mrs. Helen Chen $12,000 in restitution, plus $8,000 for emotional distress and legal fees. This case is forwarded to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Your actions were crimes, Mr. Patterson, and you will face consequences. Brandon's face went from red with rage to pale white as reality sank in. "And as for you, Mrs. Patterson," Judge Judy continued, "you committed perjury, obstructed justice, and helped your son escape accountability. Your case will also go to the district attorney for criminal charges. I hope your sentence gives you time to reflect on the difference between love and enabling, between protecting and destroying." The words landed like hammer blows. Diane's suburban comfort, reputation, and freedom were all in jeopardy because she had chosen to be her son's accomplice. The courtroom erupted in applause, not for Diane's suffering, but for Mrs. Chen's vindication. The widow, long doubted and gaslit, finally had her reality validated. Her daughter, present for support, wrapped her in comfort, whispering words of relief. As court officers prepared to escort Brandon out, Diane made a final attempt to reach him, standing on trembling legs. "Brandon, I'm so sorry. I failed you by protecting you instead of parenting you. I taught you love meant escaping consequences. I'm sorry I helped create someone who could hurt people without remorse." But Brandon didn't turn. He ignored her apology, showing no understanding or appreciation. He walked out, convinced the world was wrong, and he was the victim, never acknowledging the pain he caused. That image, a son walking away from his mother's desperate plea, would haunt Diane forever, proof that her protection had only enabled cruelty. The courtroom footage exploded across social media within hours. Diane's testimony, Judge Judy's evidence, Brandon's betrayal, and Diane's breakdown became the most shared courtroom content in Internet history, viewed over 30 million times across YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. The hashtag #YourOverprotection began trending. Turley. The story went viral worldwide, as millions of parents, family members, and concerned citizens shared their own experiences of enabling versus accountability. Parenting forums erupted with discussions about where the line lies between supporting your children and destroying them with unconditional protection. Family therapists used the footage in sessions to illustrate the long-term damage caused by shielding people from the natural consequences of their actions. Legal ethics professors showed it to law students as a stark example of how good intentions can become criminal behavior when loyalty overrides truth. The aftermath for the Patterson family was swift and merciless. Diane's husband filed for divorce within a week, stating that he could no longer be married to someone who valued protecting their criminal son over basic integrity and honesty. He had warned Diane for years that her enabling was harming Brandon rather than helping him, and watching her commit perjury on national television had been the final straw. Diane faced criminal charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. She eventually pleaded guilty, receiving 18 months of probation, 300 hours of community service, and mandatory counseling. Her professional reputation in the suburban community, she had long been a respected volunteer and social figure, was destroyed overnight. Former friends avoided her, and organizations quietly removed her from boards and committees. Legal fees, restitution payments, and the loss of her husband's income forced her to sell their home and move into a modest apartment. Brandon was sentenced to 3 years in prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud, theft, and elder abuse. Additional victims came forward after seeing the Judge Judy episode, resulting in 6 more civil lawsuits. For the first time, he had to face consequences without his mother intervening, and prison proved to be the harsh teacher that decades of leniency had failed to be. Mrs. Chen received her restitution and eventually turned her experience into advocacy work. She spoke at senior centers about financial fraud, teaching others how to protect themselves from predators who exploit trust and vulnerability. She became a voice for elderly victims, transforming her trauma into purpose. 18 months after the devastating courtroom appearance, Diane began speaking to parenting groups and family counseling centers about her experience. Her message was simple but powerful. Real love sometimes means allowing people to face consequences. Protection becomes abuse when it harms others. The hardest thing a parent can do is refuse to save their child from themselves. She spoke openly about her mistakes, how she had confused unconditional love with unconditional enabling, and how her fear of her son experiencing pain had caused far more suffering than any consequence could have. Her talks were raw and honest, filled with tears, regret, and hard-earned wisdom about the difference between helping and hurting, between supporting and suffocating, between love and destruction. Diane could never undo the damage she had caused, never restore Mrs. Chen's lost months of trust, nor repair the years Brandon had spent becoming a predator instead of a productive adult. But she could use her catastrophic failure as a warning to others, a cautionary tale of what happens when parents choose comfort over character, protection over accountability, and enabling over genuine love. Judge Judy's handling of the case became legendary in both legal and popular culture. Her methodical exposure of Diane's lies, refusal to be swayed by maternal devotion when it enabled injustice, and clear articulation of the difference between love and enabling resonated with millions who had witnessed similar dynamics in their own families and communities. The case reminded everyone that the justice system, at its best, doesn't just punish wrongdoing. It exposes truth, protects victims, and forces people to confront realities they've long avoided. Diane Patterson had walked into that courtroom prepared to lie for her son one more time, convinced that maternal love justified any deception. She walked out understanding that her lies hadn't protected Brandon. They had destroyed him, and that the truth she tried so desperately to hide was the only thing that could have ever set either of them free. If this story moved you, If it made you think about the difference between protecting loved ones and enabling their worst behavior, share this video with anyone who needs to understand that real love sometimes means letting consequences happen. Accountability isn't cruelty, it's compassion. And the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the prettiest lie. Comment below about the hardest truth you've ever faced about someone you loved, or a time when consequences taught you what comfort never could. The lesson of Diane Patterson's courtroom breakdown isn't just about one mother and one son. It's about all of us. About the choices we make between comfort and character, between easy lies and hard truths, between enabling destruction and demanding better. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to protect someone from reality. And sometimes the truth that makes us cry is the only thing that can finally set us free.